The clock on the wall of the coroner's office hadn't yet hit noon, but the Somerton Man already felt ancient, untouchable. His face was serene, almost beautiful, framed by the shadows of that early December morning in 1948. Detective Sergeant John Detmer, a man who believed in the tangible weight of evidence, stared down at the polished shoes and the neatly pressed suit of the deceased. Everything about the man screamed order. Everything about his death screamed chaos. He had been found just after dawn, slumped against the seawall on a public beach in Adelaide. The sea air carried the cold scent of impending rain. People walked by bodies on the beach all the time, mistaking them for sleepers, sunburnt drunks or exhausted travelers. But this man wasn't asleep. He was arranged. Detmer leaned closer. No wallet. No identification. That was the first alarm bell. Then the small, specific details that broke the veneer of normalcy. Every single tag and label had been cut from his clothing. Not ripped out in haste, but meticulously sliced away with a razor or a tiny, sharp knife. His tie, ironically, was still knotted perfectly. He wore no jewelry, not even a simple wedding band. This wasn't a man running from his past. This was a man whose past had been erased for him. The contents of his pockets were the only clues, and they were maddeningly ordinary. A pack of Rothman cigarettes, an unused train ticket, a box of matches, and a fine-toothed comb. Mundane things that a man buys without a thought. But Detmer had his eye on something else. Rolled tightly into a tiny cylinder and tucked into a fob pocket, was a piece of paper barely larger than a thumbnail. It had been torn from a book. He used his pen to gently unroll it. Scrawled in a delicate print were two foreign words. Tamam Shud. The words were haunting. When the interpreter called, the meaning landed like a punch. Finished, or ended. The phrase came from the final page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry. The poem itself was about seizing the day, knowing that death arrives swiftly. It wasn't just a suicide note, it was a cryptic farewell, wrapped in literary significance. The autopsy only deepened the mystery. The man was physically healthy, yet his internal organs, especially his spleen, were massively congested. The official cause of death was poison. Not a standard visible poison like arsenic, but a potent, fast-acting compound that left no trace in the stomach or bloodstream. The kind of poison used by those who don't want their methods questioned. The kind of poison used in the shadows of the Cold War, by people who operate without passports or names. Detmer felt the cold dread bloom in his chest. This wasn't a local tragedy. This was international. This was coded. The Somerton Man hadn't just died. He had been decommissioned. The case became a national headline. The face of the unknown man was plastered on every newspaper, but not a single person came forward to claim him. It was as if he had materialized on the sand from thin air. The meticulous cutting of the labels, the powerful, undetectable poison, the final, terrifying two words, it all pointed toward a single, horrific conclusion. This man was disposable, but his identity was not. And whoever killed him wanted to make sure he was forgotten before he was even buried. Detmer looked at the body one last time, recognizing the deep chill of a puzzle that wasn't meant to be solved. He knew instinctively that the real story wasn't the death itself, but the life that led to it. And that life was locked away, behind a wall of silence and ink. The search for the matching book was a long shot, a desperate reach into the void. But then, months later, a breakthrough arrived, delivered by chance and public curiosity. A man came forward with a rare first edition of the Rubaiyat, claiming he'd found it tossed onto the back seat of his unlocked car, parked miles away from the beach. He'd never reported it, thinking it was just a strange occurrence. When he finally opened the book, the last page was missing, torn precisely where the Somerton Man's note had been ripped. The book wasn't a dead end, it was the start of the labyrinth. Detmer took the cover to the lab. Beneath the surface, the forensic team discovered shallow indentations. Scratched, almost invisibly, into the back cardboard cover was a sequence of 5 lines of capital letters. It wasn't a poem or a scribble or a signature. It was organized. It was deliberate. Detmer's blood ran cold. This was the true message. The Tamam Shud note was just the lock. This was the combination. It was a cipher, a code meant only for the eyes of the intended recipient. The most experienced codebreakers, including the experts from Australian military intelligence, were handed the sequence. They tried everything: transposition, substitution, frequency analysis. They wrestled with the 5 seemingly random lines for months. The result was always the same: silence. The code was unbreakable. It was too short, too complex, or perhaps based on a one-time pad that had been destroyed. It was a message that meant everything yet communicated nothing. But the book yielded one final terrifying clue, scrawled beneath the cipher, separate from the code. A 7-digit telephone number. The number belonged to a woman known as Jessica Thompson, a pseudonym granted to protect her identity. She was a former nurse who lived within walking distance of Somerton Beach. Detmer tracked her down, his hands sweating. He showed her the plaster cast of the dead man's face. The reaction was immediate, powerful, and utterly controlled. The blood drained from her face. Her breathing hitched. Her eyes went wide with a panic that she ruthlessly forced back down. She denied knowing him, but the denial was a performance, practiced and brittle. She confessed only to one thing: she had owned a copy of the Rubaiyat during the war. She claimed she had given it to an army lieutenant named Alfred Boxall. Boxall was quickly found, alive and well, his copy of the poetry collection untouched. Jessica was lying, or at least withholding the absolute truth. Detmer realized the true horror. The code might be a message, but the woman was the connection. Was she a victim? A co-conspirator? Or a heartbroken woman caught in the crossfire of international espionage? He pressed her gently, but she was an iron wall. She admitted nothing more, her eyes conveying a terror that seemed far greater than the fear of a simple police interview. The Somerton Man was buried in an unmarked grave, his name still unknown. His face faded from the headlines. The cipher remains locked away in a police file, mocking the cleverest minds in the world. Jessica Thompson lived out her life, never speaking another word about the man on the beach. The mystery today is perfect, pristine, and unresolved. A man dies on a beach, poisoned by a ghost. His final words are literary code, and his only link to the living world is a number scribbled next to an unbreakable cipher, leading to a woman who chose silence over salvation. The question remains, was the Tamam Shud on that tiny slip of paper not an epitaph but a warning? And what dark, unseen network ended his story with such calculated, terrible precision?